The courtroom held its breath as Malik's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You're my mom," he said, his words not a question but a challenge, hurled at the judge who stared down from her towering bench. Every eye in the room snapped to her, waiting for the explosion that never came. Judge Eleanor Grayson's face didn't crack, but her hands betrayed her fingers tightening around the gavel until her knuckles paled. Malik, barely 17, stood in shackles, his orange jumpsuit stark against the polished wood of the courtroom. He was on trial for a crime he swore he didn't commit, an armed robbery that left a store clerk in a coma. The evidence was damning grainy security footage, a witness who swore it was him, and a system that seemed eager to lock another black kid away. But Malik wasn't here to beg. He was here to unravel a truth buried so deep it could shatter the room. 17 years ago, Eleanor had been a scared teenager herself, pregnant and alone in a city that didn't care. She'd given her baby up, a boy with her eyes, to a system she trusted to protect him. She'd built a life since then: law school, a judgeship, a reputation for fairness. But fairness was a fragile thing when the past walked into her courtroom wearing her son's face. Malik didn't know her story, but he'd pieced together enough. A faded letter, found in his foster mother's attic, had led him here. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was enough to make him stand taller, to make his voice carry the weight of a lifetime of questions. The prosecutor, a sharp man named Hargrove, smirked from his table. "Your Honor, the defendant's theatrics are irrelevant. We have a case to try." His tone dripped with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted the system's machinery. Eleanor's gaze flicked to him, then back to Malik. She could recuse herself. She should recuse herself. But the thought of walking away from this boy, her boy, felt like abandoning him twice. "Sit down, Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice steady but hollow. Malik didn't move. His eyes, dark and unyielding, held hers. "You don't get to pretend," he said. "Not now." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop him. She leaned forward, her robes pooling around her like a shield she no longer wanted. "You will address this court with respect," she said, but the words felt wrong, like a script she didn't believe. Malik's laugh was bitter, cutting. "Respect? Where was that when they dragged me out of my house? When they said I was just another thug?" He gestured to the room, to the mostly white faces staring back at him. "Y'all look at me and see a criminal. But you," he pointed at Eleanor. "You're supposed to see me." The room erupted. Hargrove shot to his feet, demanding order. Spectators whispered, their voices a low hum of shock and intrigue. Eleanor's heart pounded, but she didn't call for silence. She let the chaos swirl, let Malik's words hang in the air. Because he was right. She saw him not just the boy in the jumpsuit, but the baby she'd held for one fleeting hour before the world took him away. The trial had begun 3 days ago, and every moment had been a battle. The prosecution painted Malik as a predator, a kid who'd grown up in foster homes and, inevitably, turned to crime. The security footage showed a figure in a hoodie, face obscured, wielding a gun. The store clerk, a father of 2, was still fighting for his life in a hospital bed. Hargrove leaned hard on the jury, his voice smooth as he described Malik's violent tendencies and disregard for the law. The evidence was circumstantial but heavy, and the jury's faces pinched, skeptical, told Malik he was already guilty in their eyes. His public defender, Miss Carter, was overworked but fierce. She'd fought to suppress the footage, argued the witness was unreliable, and pointed out the lack of physical evidence tying Malik to the crime. But the system wasn't built for kids like Malik. It was built to churn through them, to lock them away before they could demand more. Carter had warned him, "Don't make this personal. Focus on the case." But for Malik, it was personal. It always had been. He'd grown up in a world that saw his skin first and his humanity second. Foster homes had taught him to fight for every scrap of dignity. School suspensions, cops who followed him for no reason, neighbors who crossed the street when he passed. Malik knew the script. But the letter he'd found last year changed everything. It was written in a woman's hand, addressed to "my son," with no name but a promise, "I'll find you one day." The foster agency's records led him to Eleanor Grayson, a judge known for her tough but fair rulings. He hadn't believed it at first. A judge? His mother? But the eyes in her photo matched his own, and the math added up. Now, standing in her courtroom, Malik wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting for answers. "You left me," he said, his voice softer now, almost breaking. "And now you're gonna let them take me again." The words hit Eleanor like a punch. She felt the eyes of the courtroom boring into her, but all she could see was Malik, his anger, his pain, his hope. Hargrove seized the moment. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant is manipulating the court." Carter jumped up, her voice sharp. "Objection. My client is entitled to speak." The jury shifted uncomfortably, sensing the trial slipping into something bigger, something raw. Eleanor's mind raced. She could declare a mistrial, but that would only delay the inevitable. She could push forward, but every ruling she made would be scrutinized, tainted by the truth only she and Malik knew. "Enough," she said finally, her voice cutting through the noise. "We will recess for 1 hour. Mr. Jackson, you will meet with your counsel. I expect decorum when we return." She banged the gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Malik didn't flinch. He held her gaze as the bailiff led him away, his chains clinking with every step. In her chambers, Eleanor sat alone, the weight of the moment crushing her. The letter Malik mentioned, she hadn't written it, not exactly. It was a draft, a desperate note she'd scribbled in the hospital before giving him up. She'd never sent it, never meant for it to be found. But somehow, it had reached him, a ghost from her past that refused to stay buried. She pulled a photo from her desk drawer, one she'd kept hidden for years, a newborn boy, swaddled in a blanket, his tiny hand curled around her finger. She hadn't looked at it in a decade, but now it felt like a lifeline. The hour passed too quickly. Back in the courtroom, Malik sat straighter, his defiance tempered but not gone. Carter had clearly coached him, but his eyes still burned with purpose. The trial resumed with Hargrove calling his star witness, a store employee who claimed to have seen Malik's face during the robbery. The man was nervous, his story inconsistent under Carter's cross-examination, but the jury seemed unmoved. Eleanor watched them closely, noting the way some avoided Malik's gaze, the way others leaned forward when Hargrove spoke. Prejudice was a quiet poison, and she'd seen it seep into too many trials. When it was Malik's turn to testify, the room went still. He took the stand, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "I wasn't there," he said. "I was at home, studying for a math test. I got a sister, she's 8, and I was helping her with her homework." He looked at the jury, not pleading but demanding they see him. "I ain't perfect, but I ain't no thief. And I ain't no killer." Then he turned to Eleanor. "You want to know who I am? Ask yourself." The courtroom buzzed again, but Eleanor didn't stop him. She let him speak, let his words fill the space. He talked about growing up in foster care, about the times he'd been stopped by police for looking suspicious, about the teachers who assumed he'd fail. He talked about the letter, how it gave him hope when nothing else did. "I thought maybe someone out there cared," he said. "But maybe I was wrong." Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him he wasn't wrong, that she'd cared every day for 17 years. But she was a judge, bound by rules she'd sworn to uphold. The truth could destroy her career, her reputation. Worse, it might not save Malik. The system didn't care about their story, it cared about evidence, and the evidence was stacked against him. As Malik stepped down, Carter leaned toward him, whispering something that made him nod. Hargrove stood for his cross-examination, his questions sharp and relentless. "You expect us to believe you were home studying?" he asked. "No one saw you. No one can confirm your alibi. Malik's jaw clenched, but he didn't waver. "My sister can," he said. "But y'all didn't ask her." The mention of his sister shifted something in the room. A juror, an older woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. Eleanor noticed, her heart flickering with hope. But hope was dangerous in a place like this. Hargrove pressed harder, painting Malik as a liar, a kid who'd do anything to dodge justice. By the time he sat down, the jury looked torn, their faces a mix of doubt and exhaustion. The trial stretched into the afternoon, with more witnesses and arguments that felt like a tug-of-war over Malik's life. Eleanor's rulings were careful, precise, but every decision felt like a step toward a cliff. She couldn't shake the image of Malik's eyes, the way they mirrored her own. She couldn't ignore the letter, the one piece of their past that had survived. As the day ended, Carter approached the bench, her voice low. "Your Honor, I need to discuss a potential conflict of interest." Eleanor's heart stopped. She knew what was coming. Carter had seen the letter, had heard Malik's claims. If this went public, it would unravel everything. "Not now," Eleanor said, her tone final. "We'll address it tomorrow." That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat in her office, the photo of her son on her desk, and thought about the choices that had led her here. She'd wanted to protect him by letting him go, but had she only condemned him to a world that would never see him as she did? The trial wasn't just about a robbery, it was about a system that judged boys like Malik before they ever had a chance. When the courtroom reconvened, the tension was thicker than ever. Malik sat quietly, but his presence filled the room. Carter began her closing argument, her voice rising with passion. "This case isn't about evidence," she said. "It's about who we choose to believe. Malik Jackson is not a criminal. He's a boy who's been fighting his whole life to be seen." She turned to the jury, her eyes fierce. "See him now." Hargrove's closing was colder, methodical. He leaned on the footage, the witness, the undeniable facts. But as he spoke, Eleanor noticed the jury's attention drifting to Malik. One juror, a young man, met Malik's eyes and didn't look away. When it was time for Eleanor to instruct the jury, her voice trembled for the first time. "You must weigh the evidence impartially," she said, but the words felt hollow. She wanted to say more, to tell them about the boy she'd lost, the boy she'd found again. But she couldn't. Not yet. The jury filed out, and the waiting began. Malik sat with Carter, his head bowed but his shoulders square. Eleanor watched him from the bench, her heart a battlefield of duty and love. Whatever the verdict, she knew one thing, she wouldn't let him go again. Not without a fight. The jury's deliberation stretched into hours, each minute a weight on Eleanor's chest. She sat in her chambers, the photo of her newborn son still on her desk, its edges worn from years of secret glances. She hadn't planned to keep it so close, but now it felt like the only anchor in a storm. Malik's words echoed in her mind, "You're supposed to see me." She did see him, more clearly than anyone else in that courtroom, but seeing wasn't enough. The system she served didn't bend for personal truths, no matter how raw or real. In the courtroom, Malik sat with Ms. Carter, his hands folded but his eyes restless. He'd stopped looking at Eleanor, as if he'd poured all his hope into that one moment of confrontation and now had nothing left. Carter whispered to him, her voice steady but urgent, trying to keep his spirits up. The spectators were restless too, their murmurs a constant hum. Some saw Malik as a victim, others as a threat. The divide was clear in their faces, those who leaned toward him with sympathy, and those who sat back, arms crossed, already convinced of his guilt. Eleanor returned to the bench as the jury filed back in. The room went silent, the air thick with anticipation. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, stood to deliver the verdict. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her face remained a mask of calm. On the charge of armed robbery, the foreman said, "We find the defendant not guilty." A gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by a burst of noise, cheers from some, angry mutters from others. Malik's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Carter gripped his arm, her smile fierce and triumphant. Eleanor banged her gavel, calling for order, but her own relief was a tidal wave. She wanted to look at Malik, to tell him it was over, but duty held her still. "The defendant is free to go," she said, her voice steady but laced with something deeper. The bailiff unlocked Malik's shackles, and for the first time, he stood without chains, his shoulders rising as if a weight had been lifted. But his eyes found Eleanor's again, and they weren't free of questions. As the courtroom emptied, Eleanor called for a private meeting in her chambers with Malik and Carter. Hargrove protested, citing impropriety, but Eleanor shut him down with a look. "This is not about the case," she said. "It's about the truth." In her chambers, with the door closed, the air felt different, less like a courtroom and more like a confessional. Malik stood across from her, Carter at his side, her presence a quiet anchor. "I didn't want it to happen like this," Eleanor began, her voice softer than it had been all day. "I was 18. Scared. Alone. I thought giving you up was the only way to give you a better life." She paused, her throat tight. "I was wrong." Malik's face was unreadable, but his hands trembled. "You left me," he said, echoing his words from the courtroom. "And I grew up in homes where nobody cared. Nobody saw me." Eleanor nodded, tears brimming but not falling. "I know. And I'll carry that regret forever. But I never stopped thinking about you. That letter, you weren't supposed to find it, but I'm glad you did." She pulled the photo from her desk, sliding it toward him. Malik stared at it, his breath catching. The baby in the blanket, the tiny hand curled around a finger, it was him. Proof of a bond he'd only guessed at. Carter cleared her throat. "Your Honor, this could complicate things. If this goes public, it'll raise questions about impartiality. The verdict could be challenged." Eleanor nodded, her jaw tight. "I know. That's why I'm stepping down." Malik's head jerked up, and Carter's eyes widened. "You don't have to," Carter started, but Eleanor cut her off. "I do. For him. For me." Malik's voice was quiet but sharp. "Why now? Why not before?" Eleanor met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I didn't know how to find you. And when I did, I was afraid of what it would mean, afraid of what I'd lost. But I'm not afraid anymore." She stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. "I'm here now, Malik. If you'll let me be." For a moment, Malik said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded, his eyes glistening. "I don't know what that looks like," he admitted. "But I want to try." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Eleanor felt a sob rise in her chest, but she held it back, reaching out to touch his shoulder. He didn't pull away. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Eleanor's resignation made headlines, sparking debates about justice, bias, and the system's flaws. Some called her a hero for choosing her son over her career, others accused her of undermining the law. Malik's story spread too, amplified by activists who saw in him a symbol of resilience against a world that too often judged him by his skin. The store clerk woke from his coma, and new evidence pointed to another suspected detail Hargrove had conveniently overlooked. The case was reopened, and Malik's name was cleared for good. Eleanor and Malik began to rebuild, one cautious step at a time. They met for coffee, then dinners, then long talks about the years they'd lost. Malik introduced her to his little sister, Tasha, who hugged Eleanor without hesitation, her trust a gift Eleanor didn't feel she deserved. They didn't call each other mother and son, not yet, but the words hovered between them, waiting for the right moment. The community around them was less forgiving. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, some demanding accountability for Eleanor's conflict of interest, others rallying against the systemic racism that had nearly destroyed Malik's life. Social media buzzed with opinions, from support for Malik's vindication to outrage over Eleanor's actions. The divide was stark, a mirror of the courtroom's tension. But Malik and Eleanor kept their focus on each other, on the fragile bond they were forging. One evening, as they sat in Eleanor's small apartment, Malik pulled out the letter again. "Why'd you write this?" he asked, his voice softer than before. Eleanor took it, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "I wanted you to know you were loved," she said. "Even if I couldn't be the one to show you." Malik nodded, his eyes distant but warm. "I felt it," he said. "Even when I didn't know it was you." Their story didn't erase the pain of the past or the flaws of the system. But it offered Hopi a reminder that truth, when fought for, could break through even the hardest barriers. Malik enrolled in community college, studying criminal justice, determined to change the system that had almost broken him. Eleanor volunteered at a legal aid clinic, helping kids like Malik navigate a world stacked against them. Together, they were proof that justice wasn't just a verdict, it was a choice to see, to listen, to fight. As their story spread, it sparked conversations in homes, schools, and courtrooms. People argued over right and wrong, over fairness and forgiveness. Was Eleanor's resignation justice, or was it privilege? Was Malik's freedom a victory, or a fluke in a system that rarely bent? These questions lingered, challenging everyone to look closer at the law, at each other, at themselves.